The gravel road curved like a cracked spine through the pine woods, winding higher into the fog-veiled ridges that overlooked the valley. Evelyn cross-drove with both hands on the wheel, not because the road was difficult, but because letting go, even one hand, felt dangerous these days. Too much slipped through when she let go. Too much had already. Her silver Subaru hadn't seen a car wash in months. Dried leaves clung to the windshield wipers, and the passenger seat held a quiet bouquet of white anemones wrapped in brown paper. They weren't his favorite. He never had one, but they were clean, soft, and they didn't scream funeral the way roses did. The forest was mostly bare now, just bones and shadows. Pines stood tall but quiet, their needles still clinging to the last mist of autumn. It had rained the night before, not heavily, just enough to turn the dirt into memory, the kind that lingered under your shoes and refused to stay outside. When she parked, she sat there for a moment, listening. Nothing, not even birdsong. She looked up through the windshield at the familiar wrought iron gate of Trillium Grove Cemetery. It had always felt like a place for someone else's story, the old kind with faded stones and strangers' names etched in lichen. Until it didn't. Evelyn stepped out slowly, pulling her coat tighter around her. The wind pushed gently against her like an old friend unsure whether to hug her or leave her alone. She preferred the latter. Hugging made things harder. Her boots crunched the wet gravel path. Every step a tiny betrayal. She hated that sound. It reminded her of Drew's last voicemail, clipped, fast, rushed like he was trying to outrun something. He hadn't made it. That was almost 6 months ago. She turned left, then right, weaving between rows of time-worn stones and fresh markers. No people, just rustling wind and old names. Her destination sat beneath a crooked alder tree, its bark dark with age, branches reaching out like fingers unsure whether to hold on or let go. Andrew Cross, 2009 to 2024. A life that taught us how to listen. The words still made her stomach twist. She lowered herself to her knees and set the flowers gently at the base of the stone, just a few feet away from her. Then, slowly, painfully, began crawling toward the grave. She didn't move, not because she was afraid, but because she couldn't. Something in the moment pressed her down, rooted her like she'd become part of the earth. The air between them felt charged, strange, too still to be real. The Bobcat reached the stone, and then, to her complete disbelief, he curled beside it, curled up like a house cat, pressing his small body to the cold base of the grave. His front paw folded awkwardly beneath him, his ribs fluttering with every shuddering breath. He cried again. Evelyn whispered, "Oh my God," but the forest didn't echo her. The cub didn't react. He simply lay there, eyes open, breathing shallow, pressing his face into the moss that had grown near Drew's name. Something broke in her. She reached out, hand trembling, unsure what she meant to do. Touch him? Comfort him? Lift him up and run? She stopped herself inches away. The cub blinked slowly, and for a split second, just one, Evelyn felt something old and terrible uncoil inside her. A thought too absurd to believe, but too wild to ignore. He knows. She pulled her hand back, stood up slowly, eyes still locked on the small, wild thing that had crawled to her son's grave like it had nowhere else left to go. The world felt quieter than it ever had before, and the grave was no longer alone. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. Even after she'd gently lifted the cub from the graveside, wrapped him in her scarf like something sacred, and driven back through the twisting pine roads to her quiet home, the weight of it followed her. His small frame, shaking in the passenger seat. His breaths, fast, shallow, almost human. And those eyes, they weren't wild in the way she expected. They were pleading. Her cabin stood just outside Alder Creek, nestled between hills and fir trees, half hidden from the road. She hadn't had visitors in months. That used to scare her. Now it was all she wanted. She carried the cub inside in silence, the scarf now streaked with dirt and faint blood from his paw. The fireplace was still glowing with the last embers of her morning fire. She knelt near it and gently unwrapped him on a Drew's old sleeping bag. It was faded blue with rocket ships on it, one of the few things she never had the strength to throw out. The cub whimpered as his paw touched the fabric, then slowly relaxed, curling tighter into the warmth like he had done it before. Evelyn sat cross-legged beside him, not daring to touch, only watching. Somewhere in her chest, a memory moved, not one she summoned, but one that rose on its own, like smoke from ash. Drew, at age 7, curled up under that very sleeping bag, flashlight under chin, telling ghost stories with eyes wide open and cheeks smudged with dirt. She pressed her hand to her mouth. She didn't want to cry. Not now. Not with the cub breathing so softly beside her. It felt like shattering glass in front of child. She waited until he fell asleep before she whispered, "Why did you come to me?" No answer. Just the faint tick of the wall clock and the fire spitting quietly. She didn't call animal control. She didn't call the ranger's office. She called only one person, Reed Monroe, a local wildlife vet she'd met once at a conservation fundraiser years ago. She still had his number scratched into an old notebook by the fridge. To her surprise, he answered on the second ring. "Evelyn Cross?" he said, his voice laced with caution and sleep. "It's been years. I found something," she said, pausing. "No, that's not right. Something found me." By mid-morning, Reed had driven in, a broad-shouldered man in his early 30s with wild brown curls tied back and a stitched leather-filled bag slung over his shoulder. He moved carefully, like someone used to being watched by scared things. He knelt by the cub, now resting in a makeshift corner nest beside the stone hearth. The bobcat's paw was inflamed, torn at the pad, likely caught in wire or a sharp branch. "Male," Reed murmured. 4 to 5 months old. "Noko yet. Wild. Too young to be alone." Evelyn leaned on the counter, arms crossed. He came to the grave. To Drew's grave. He didn't run. He cried. Reed didn't laugh. Didn't dismiss her. He only said they feel things. Sometimes more than we do. He cleaned the wound gently, wrapped the paw in gauze, and gave the cub a mild sedative from a tiny syringe. The bobcat stirred once, then slipped into sleep like it was familiar with pain. "I should take him to the rehab center," Reed finally said. "That's procedure." Evelyn's voice was sharper than she meant. "No." Reed paused. She lowered her eyes. "Not yet." He nodded slowly. "Okay, but it can't be long. If he bonds too much, it'll ruin his rewilding. They imprint faster when they're injured." Evelyn almost whispered, "So do people." He didn't argue. Reed left shortly after, promising to check back in 2 days. The door clicked behind him with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. And then it was just her, the cabin, the sleeping cub, and the past. That afternoon, she sat beside the window with her journal open, pen hovering over the page. She hadn't written a single line since the funeral. But now, she needed to say something. Not to herself, not even to Drew. To the cub. She wrote, "You don't know me, but you came anyway. You crawled to the place no one else visits. And you cried the way I do when no one's watching. You carry the sound of something I forgot, something lost. I don't know who you are, but I feel like you already knew me." Outside, fog settled again over the trees. She lit a candle by the window and watched the cub sleep through the glass reflection, his chest rising and falling like a heartbeat someone else had left behind for her to borrow. The next morning, Evelyn woke to a strange sound, a tiny, rhythmic thump. She followed it, barefoot, into the living room. The bobcat cub was pawing at the bookshelf, specifically at the bottom corner where a small wooden frame had fallen behind some old National Geographics. It was Drew's photo, one from their last camping trip before the accident. Him in a flannel hoodie, hair wild, holding up a pine cone like a treasure. Evelyn stood frozen. The cub stepped toward it, sat beside it, and curled into the exact position he had at the grave. This time he didn't cry, and neither did she. Not yet. But the silence between them had changed. It was no longer the silence of nothing. It was the silence of something beginning. She never told anyone the full story of what happened to Drew. Not the therapist, not the pastor, not even Reed, who had visited twice more to check on the cub and gently remind her that time was running out for release. She had kept it locked up, the way a person might bury a poisonous root too deep to dig out. But when she stood again at the grave, nearly 2 weeks after that first encounter, and found the cub already there, curled in the exact same spot, his paw now healed, his coat cleaner, brighter, eyes no longer panicked. Something inside her broke. Not loudly, but like a thin sheet of frost cracking under gentle weight. She sat beside him. No scarf this time. No flowers. Just the air between them. And she began to speak. "I lied at the funeral," she said softly. The cub didn't stir. They all thought he was alone when it happened. They assumed the driver ran a red light, hit his bike, and that was that. But that's not what happened. She took a long breath, closing her eyes as the wind ran cold fingers through the trees. "I had texted him. Twice. Nothing urgent. Just stupid things. Pick up oat milk. Do you still want Thai for dinner?" I kept checking my phone. He was taking too long. So I called. And called again. I thought he was ignoring me. You know what I did? She swallowed hard. I got angry. I texted him. "This is why I can't trust you. You never listen." And that was the last thing he ever read. The Bobcat blinked slowly, resting his chin on the base of the headstone. His body was calm, but Evelyn saw something new in his stillness. A listening. A presence. He'd pulled over at the corner near Carver Bridge to text me back, she said. He wasn't even riding. He was on the shoulder. Helmet still on. That's when the truck veered off the road. She looked up at the sky. There were no stars. Just a pale, blue-gray dome above the trees, like the world had been papered over in grief. I think about that moment every day. Not just that he died, but that I called him into it. She wiped her nose with her sleeve, voice breaking. And I think the universe gave me you to punish me, or maybe to forgive me. I don't know which. The cub rose slowly, walked over, and without hesitation, pressed his head to her shoulder. For the first time, she wept where someone could see. Later that night, Evelyn sat with Reed on the back porch, a mug of tea cooling in her hands. He was quiet, listening. That's why she liked him. She finally asked, "Do animals grieve for people? Not just their own?" Reed scratched his beard. "Grief's not proprietary. They feel what we feel, just not in language. Sometimes they echo it. But why him? Why my son's grave? That same spot every time." Reed leaned forward. "What if it's not about your son? What if it's about what happened to him?" Evelyn frowned. "The cub." Reed nodded. "You said he was injured. Limping. Weak. But he still crawled all that way through forest and wire fencing just to curl up at a grave. You think?" Reed took a deep breath. "I think something happened to him near there. Maybe the day your son died." Evelyn's heartbeat slowed. He continued. "Sometimes trauma creates a magnet. Places that carry intense pain, they pull. People, animals, even silence." She thought back to the accident report. The edge of Carver Bridge. The ravine that dropped into the forest. Dense, steep terrain. Suddenly, her breath hitched. There had been a deer crossing warning sign near the shoulder. Drew always slowed there. She remembered because he joked about dodging forest missiles. And she remembered the witness report. The truck swerved, possibly to avoid something. "What if it wasn't a deer?" she whispered. Reed turned to her. "What if it was a cub? This cub?" A long silence fell between them. Then Reed nodded slowly. "The timelines match. Age 2. If he got separated from his mother during that panic. If the impact startled them." "He lost her," Evelyn said. "Same moment I lost him." That night, she stood at the forest edge with a flashlight, retracing the possible path from the ravine to the cemetery. It was steep, tangled with branches, mud-slicked and cold. But it was possible, especially for a scared, limping cub drawn back to the one place something echoed. 3 days later, a storm rolled in. The kind of windstorm that sent branches flying and power lines sparking. Evelyn huddled inside with the cub, now stronger, calmer. He followed her through the house, slept in the corner of Drew's old room, pawed once again at the photos near the bookshelf. And at exactly 3:18 a.m., he let out a low, guttural cry. Not a panic cry, a calling. Evelyn woke, heart thudding. She grabbed her flashlight. The cub ran to the door. She followed. Rain slammed the earth like fists. Thunder echoed between hills. But the cub led her anyway, not to the grave, but to the bridge. Carver Bridge, the site. They reached the shoulder. And there, half buried under wet leaves, Evelyn found it. A faded leather collar, torn at the edge. just a small remnant. Wild. Handmade. With a tiny silver tag shaped like a pine tree. Reed had been right. This cub had lost someone, too. And like Evelyn, he had been returning again and again, not just out of instinct, but grief. Two broken beings. One moment, two lives taken, and what was left of both drawn back to the only place they felt heard. When they returned, soaked and silent, Evelyn didn't speak. She only crouched down beside the bobcat cub and whispered, "You didn't crawl to my son's grave, did you?" She choked, smile trembling through her tears. "You were crawling home." And he curled at her feet, no longer shaking, just resting. The grave was quiet. No sound but the wind brushing dry leaves in slow circles over the earth where he lay. Morning broke across the pines, muted and gray, like the sky hadn't yet found its reason to rise. Wren stood still. The world around her seemed to breathe differently now, slower, reverent, as if even the forest grieved what had been lost the night before. She didn't remember walking back, didn't remember collapsing at the edge of the grave, where the earth was still torn from where they had lowered Caleb's ashes into it just weeks ago. But there she was, sitting beside the stone, mud on her palms, the scent of pine and blood hanging faintly in the air. And beside her was the bobcat cub. He hadn't run, not even after the ambulance lights had vanished. Not even when the people in uniforms asked questions Wren didn't have words to answer. He simply stayed, curled into the dirt with that same soft shiver, eyes fixed on the grave like he too was waiting for someone who would never return. Wren turned toward him slowly. A quiet whimper left the cub. His eyes, wild, golden, heartbreakingly vulnerable, met hers. There was something different in him now. The desperation of hunger was still there, but beneath it was something older, deeper. Loss. And that's when it came to her. Unexpected, staggering. The realization hit like a silent scream. The cub hadn't wandered there by accident. He hadn't just shown up the day of Caleb's burial. The dates lined up. The timeline fit. Caleb had been volunteering at the wildlife station the week he died. She had found the journal days after, still tucked under his bed. In one entry, scrawled with a rushed hand, he had written, "Small male cub. Injured paw. Too young for relocation. Needs watching. Feisty but soft-hearted. We'll check again before leaving." A photograph had been taped beside it, slightly blurred but unmistakable. The same cub. This wasn't chance. This animal, this small, trembling wild thing, had known her son, had been with him in the final days. And when Caleb never returned, he had come here to the last place where his scent lingered, where the earth remembered him. He had come to grieve. Wren covered her mouth with one hand, the weight of it all finally tipping inside her. Tears spilled, not in sharp sobs now, but slow and soundless, like the kind that come when the heart is too tired to break any further. A soft rustle behind her broke the moment. Someone was approaching. Dr. Fletcher, the local wildlife vet, stepped into the clearing. Mid-30s, tall, face worn from field work, but gentle in his movements. He had been the one to identify the cub's connection to the station. It was he who had quietly suggested Wren not alert the authorities just yet, that sometimes grief needs a place to rest, too. He crouched beside her, speaking low. I looked into it. Caleb had a permit. He wasn't supposed to bring the cub close to town, but he kept notes. That cub was injured bad. Caleb was helping him recover. Then he died before he could bring him back. Wren nodded faintly. He came back anyway. Dr. Fletcher exhaled. Not many people believe wild animals remember, but some do. They return to places that meant safety, or kindness, or love, Wren whispered. The vet didn't reply, but he didn't have to. They sat in silence. The three of them, woman, man, and wild creature, bathed in the soft light of morning that finally dared to show its face. Over the next days, Wren did not return to the city. The cub remained, trailing her movements at a cautious distance. She brought food, raw quail, later small pieces of rabbit, and water bowls nestled in tree roots. She never tried to cage him, never forced affection, but each day he came closer, sometimes curling beside Caleb's stone at dusk, sometimes simply watching her with those deep, unreadable eyes. And one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the cub stepped into the space between them. Slowly, delicately, he pressed his head against Wren's knee and let out the smallest of sounds. A chuff, half purr, half sigh, and utterly wild. She didn't move, but inside, something in her opened. She had spent so long drowning in the guilt of Caleb's death. The arguments, the missed calls, the way he had gone off into the woods to be closer to things she never understood. She thought she had lost every part of him. But this cub, this living, breathing piece of her son's final weeks, had found her. Maybe to grieve, maybe to heal, maybe to remind her that the wild does not forget kindness. Weeks turned to months. Wren began writing again. Not articles about markets or mergers, but stories, observations, pieces about human grief and animal memory, about silence, about the strange ways life continues even when we wish it wouldn't. The cub, now stronger, still visited the grave. Never stayed long, but he came, always at dusk, always when the wind was still. One spring morning, a letter arrived from the Wildlife Reserve Board. They had accepted Wren's proposal, a new program dedicated to human-animal grief studies, focusing on observed mourning in wild species. Funded by the Caleb Kessler Memorial Trust. She read it by the grave, the cub watching her from the shade. "Your story isn't over," she said aloud, voice trembling. "Neither is his." A year later, in a quiet forest clearing, sunlight spills through the trees. A plaque stands beside the grave, weathered but firm. Here lies Caleb Kessler, beloved son, fierce protector of the wild. May his compassion echo through every cry in the trees. From the shadows, a grown bobcat watches, golden eyes steady. And somewhere beyond the clearing, a woman's voice calls softly, no longer breaking, just remembering and healing. Grief doesn't speak in words. It speaks in the things that return, in wild eyes that remember, in paw prints beside a grave, in silence that's no longer empty, but full of everything we lost and still carry forward